I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's a special meeting number 19. Roll call, please.
Trustee Chen Lao.
Here.
Trustee Gibson.
Here.
Trustee Kwong.
Here.
Trustee Martin.
Here.
Trustee Osterling.
Here.
Trustee Silver.
Here.
Trustee Wong.
Here.
Pledge of Allegiance. Trustee Wong, would you please?
Sure, please rise. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Land acknowledgement. Armina, do we have the land acknowledgement?
I've got it.
Oh, you're right. Okay, then Dr. Gibson, please.
Pasadena City College is a learning community within the indigenous homelands of people who have been known as the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians of the Siskaquam Village and Kish Nation. Tonight, we acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from the land on which we gather. We also honor the legacy of the African diaspora and recognize the United States as we know it was built at the often fatal expense of forcefully enslaved black people. We are indebted to their labor and the labor of many black and brown bodies and who continue to work in the shadows for our collective benefits. PCC and its faculty, staff, and students recognize that we're all simultaneously teachers, learners, and guests in their lands. This acknowledgement is a small part of the ongoing process of working to raise awareness about histories that are too often erased or forgotten, to recognize our place in this history, and to affirm our commitment to social justice, systemic change, and anti-racism.
Thank you. Public comment on non-agenda items.
We have a few comments here today. Our first comment will come from, I'm just finding my clicker. Our first comment today will come from Ms. Shaganaka.
All right, good morning. Happy early Thanksgiving. So today I was trying to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. So I want to ask the board if Martin Luther King Jr.'s voice still matter or not. From the last previous board meeting in the public comment section, I heard so many supporters of President Jones and supporting her to be the next superintendent. And then I heard several different reasons they gave is she is a black, she is a woman, and she is a black woman. So that's just the part I'm a little bit confused about is because what I believe that Martin Luther King told everybody is he wish his kids will not judged by the skin color, and then he said he wish his kids be judged by the content of their characters. So I believe everybody learned that in elementary school. But right here, it feels like right now people are demanding President Jones to be hired simply because she is a black woman. So I was a little concerned. What happens if a white man is much more qualified? What happens if an Asian man who has more experience, leadership, or performance? Or what if any other skin color or whatever other meritocracy measurement who has a better qualification than President Jones? What would happen? So right now, I'm really concerned about the board because I feel the board is being threatened and is being kidnapped by those politically correct, woke speakers. But basically, they are saying, feels like the situation right now is, if you do not hire a black woman, you are racist. If you do not hire a black woman, you are systemic racism. So where in the case, I also believe the way I understand is, I thought that whoever is most capable, whoever who has the most performance, whoever has the most experience, whoever has the most leadership will ultimately get the position. Not really about your gender, not really about your skin color, not really about any of those things. Because when you judge someone when you judge a candidate simply because the gender and the race, skin color, that's literally the definition of discrimination. That's literally the definition of racism. So as a student, I definitely believe whichever the most capable superintendent will benefit me the most, not really the color, the skin color of the superintendent. So I just wish that the board making a decision on meritocracy, experience, leadership, management of all those, not really just about the skin color and everything. So that's my public comment. Hopefully we can have a new start of PCC.
Thank you for your comment.
Best candidate.
Thank you for your comment. Our next comment will come from James Bull.
Hello, my name is James Bull. I'm the Vice President of the Classified Senate. On behalf of the Senate, we would like to acknowledge tonight's agenda items with regard to the search process to appoint a new superintendent president as well as that of an interim. We would like the board to note that we would appreciate the board's consideration of selecting an internal candidate who is not only familiar with the business, culture, and operations of the college, but a leader that is aware of the key players, the PCC community, the various initiatives that we've worked hard to put into place, and including but not limited to the varying needs of our students. Given the current climate of the campus community, PCC needs to maintain congruity, consistency, and create a culture of healing and sustainability. PCC is deserving of someone who can lead with grace and humility until a permanent superintendent president is selected through the selection and search and selection process. We strongly encourage the Board of Trustees to reach out in consultation with the members of the Classified Senate and its constituents, and we can provide useful feedback as to individuals who can provide solid, collaborative, and collegial leadership on this campus. That said, as has been said before, we would like to state that VP Candace Jones has exemplified all of those aforementioned traits, and after preliminary discussion, we would have no objection to the appointment of VP Jones as interim and advocate for her consideration. VP Jones has regularly attended nearly every Classified Senate meeting for the past 2+ years, supported classified employees by being transparent, informative, engaging, and fair, given a space to express concerns, answer questions, and taking the time to respond, gather information, and follow up. VP Jones also helped to launch, fund, market, and facilitate People Connecting Over Coffee for the Classified Senate, which was a huge campus-wide success. Without taking credit for herself, I've done it a few times, got to connect with great people. So we thank you in advance for listening and valuing our feedback. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Our next comment will come from Sandra Meta-Walker.
Hello, good evening. My name is Sandra Meta-Walker. I am the payroll supervisor. So a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of sitting with several of you at the Latino graduation, and it was really pleasant. It was encouraging. I could see that we do want to move in the direction of moving the environment in the campus from some of the negativity that we've heard. So I wanted to come and speak to you again, and because I felt inclined to let you know that I'm here to support VP Candace Jones. I met with Ms. Jones in 2018 for the first time when she started at PCC. She came out to fiscal services and she met with some of the managers. She met with myself, and she extended an olive branch and offered her support for improving some of our processes. So through the years, we worked together. We did really well in improving the processes. And in 2020, when we had to go work at home and we had to move the payroll all online and make sure that thousands of employees were paid on time. We didn't want to affect anybody's, home payments, the food, there's all this uncertainty going on. Ms. Jones and her staff really helped my staff be able to pay everyone with little to no impact. And I really appreciate her support. There's so many things that I see her doing now in the community. I'm really big on the community. I'm a Pasadena resident, So she doesn't realize that I see her out in the community. I see her out here with the students, with the staff. And those are, I think, really important qualities to help move us forward. But she's knowledgeable. She knows about the fiscal. She knows about the campus and how we run, how to work with people, how to help conversations flow. But, I mean, from some of the topics that I am not so knowledgeable on and the bonds that she gets and the things that I hear that are going on, I'm really impressed. I admire her leadership, and I think that she's someone that can help us move forward out of our current stage. So I would like to ask that you consider VP Jones. Thank you. Have a good evening and have a great holiday.
Thank you for your comment. Our final comment this evening will come from Dr. Bernardo.
Hi, good evening to the board. This will be a kinder, gentler comment. Isaac Newton's third law of motion states that for every action or force in nature, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Again, I'm from New York. You come at me with a certain energy, you get that energy right back at you equally and oppositely. So my thoughts on the next superintendent is that we need someone with kinder, gentler energy. Someone who cares about people first and the bottom line after, because you can always look after the bottom line. Someone to set the standard from the top down in collaboration and listening. I encourage the board to hire a recruitment or search firm of color who will be able to bring us a number of different candidates of different backgrounds, not just people with ski cabins in Vermont or coming from small towns in the Midwest. I believe someone who actually believes in diversity should be in the top position. This goes for interim superintendent president as well. Contrary to the beliefs of many full-time faculty on hiring committees and HR under Bob Blazinski, there actually do exist many quality and qualified candidates of color out there. You just have to look for them, for real, and out of real interest, and not just faking diversity so that people believe you. We're not going to believe you if you don't find us a decent candidate this time. Thank you.
That concludes public comment.
Thank you. Now we are going to have information items with possible action. One is a search process, superintendent president. Our presenter today is Dr. Bryce Harris. Dr. Bryce Harris has more than 40 years of experience working with California community colleges. He is the Chancellor Emeritus for the California Community College System. And he has been working with this board for the past year on board governance, as well as board vision, goals, and the president evaluation. So please welcome Bryce Harris.
Thank you, Trustee Chin Lau and members of the board. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening to talk about the subject of both your interim president superintendent and the search for your permanent president superintendent. As Board President Chin Lau mentioned, it's worth reminding the board that we began working together back in September of last year in preparation for the October board retreat on board effectiveness. Following that retreat, you conducted another one in December, and at that second retreat, we worked with the board on developing the board's goals for the future. And then following that, in March of this year, we conducted a third retreat on the subject of board self-evaluation and evaluation of the superintendent president. So the board has recently asked me through the League on Call program, the Community College League of California supports colleges through this program. And that's the organization that has delivered the work with you since last September. And you've asked that I do some work with you on identifying a interim president superintendent and then some background on preparing you for the process of searching for a permanent superintendent president. So this evening I'm going to work with you to try to accomplish three things. First of all, to brief the board on your own policies and administrative regulations and procedures that speak to the subject of not only a search for a new superintendent president, but also the appointment of an interim. Secondly, I'll provide the board with some sample timelines for the search for your new superintendent president so that you'll begin to get a feel for the steps that are involved and, candidly, the magnitude of the process. And then finally, I will seek your input on attributes you would like to see in an interim superintendent president. So I'm going to begin by having some documents distributed to you. And the first of those you will see is your own board policy on selecting a superintendent president. I have seen a lot of these policies, and I will tell you this is a very detailed and complete policy that really does give you a tremendous amount of guidance. And so if you look on page 1, down near the bottom of the page, you'll see a number of enumerated items, and I just want to call your attention to some of those. The item number 2 suggests that the board may appoint an ad hoc committee of the board to coordinate the logistics and the procedures for the search. And I think the word that's key there is may. There are some of these other ones that will suggest that you shall or will do some of these things, but you have the option to appoint a subcommittee. Item number 3 reminds you that the board may appoint an interim superintendent president during the search for a permanent president. Now, that is the only place in the policy where the interim is spoken to. I'll talk a little bit later about one of the administrative procedures that does speak to interims, even though it doesn't talk specifically about the interim superintendent president. It does give the board some guidelines or guidance in that process. Item 4, you'll notice, talks about the fact that all of the actions in relationship to the search shall occur in an open meeting of the board, as you're demonstrating this evening with this conversation. And that word is shall, so that's not something that you have any discretion on according to your policy. Item number 5 says that you will seek the input of the campus community and the general community in this process, and the policy goes into great detail a little bit later about how that input is to be collected. Item number 6 talks about your responsibility to approve the job description for the superintendent president and all of the materials that announce the availability of the position and advertise and market for candidates to apply. That's an extremely important part of the process. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but it is something, the creation of that description, that duty description or position description is extremely important. Item number 7, the board may engage the service of a consultant or a search firm to assist with this process. Again, that's at your discretion. I will share with you a sample a little bit later that suggests that you may well be doing that, but again, it's just a sample and you may or may not choose to use a search firm. Item number 8 suggests that you will use a screening committee. And a little bit later, I'll talk about the specifics of that, but it is, according to your policy, a group of 27 individuals that have clear representation not only on the campus, but in the community. And then the item 9 suggests that the board has the authority to interview any candidate that is in the pool, even if a candidate is not forwarded to you from that committee. So although that is not common, it's certainly not unheard of, especially when a policy allows the board to do that. Item 10 talks about background checks. Item 11 talks about closed session conversations about the final candidates. 12 talks about voting in public for the final candidate that you select. And then under item 13, although I won't go into great detail, the policy certainly does, and it gives you very clear direction on the screening and application and reading committee, and then the subsets of that, the candidate interview committee and the interview committee participation composition at the bottom of the page. Again, it's really helpful if you truly want to have good, robust input that the policy clearly says what that input looks like. This is, I would argue, a model policy in that it really does lay out exactly who participates in this process and really ensures that everyone on the college is represented in this conversation. And then the last item on the last page reminds all of us that this is a very confidential process. There are people's careers at stake as it relates to confidentiality of a process like this, and so you see your own policy suggests that if anyone involved in this process violates confidentiality, they can be immediately removed from the process. Are there any questions that you have for me on the policy? If not, I'll move on forward. Yes, Tam.
What's the difference between the candidate interview committee and the interview committee participation composition? How can they be two different things?
The interview committee participation composition just gives you an idea of where all these folks are coming from. The candidate interview committee just tells you exactly who's on it. So it's designed to make sure that there is good, adequate representation across the board. Okay. I now call your attention to the next two documents. I'm going to spend some time going into detail on the first one, and then the second one is almost identical, but the timing is different. So I do this for a couple of reasons, and by the way, the highlighting on the first one, and the first one you should look at is the one that suggests the process would take place between August of 23 and June of 24. So that is a almost full year process. The highlighting on here is, what I tried to do is highlight the steps at which the board is heavily involved so that you get an idea of the magnitude of this process. I know I don't need to tell you this, but I think it's very, very important that many people would argue this is the single most important thing you do as a board. I'm not sure I agree with that. I believe that your oversight of the finances and the educational quality of the institution are certainly equally important, but it's very difficult to have a successful community college in this day and age without fabulous leadership. And so as a board, deciding what it is you want in the next leader and then making sure you find that in the candidate that you ultimately select is a very, very important process. And as you would imagine, because it is so important, it is very labor intensive and very occasionally stress oriented. And so I want to prepare you as we go through this to realize that over the next 6 to 12 months, your service on this board is going to increase pretty dramatically. Some of you have been through this process before, some of you have not, but although I don't necessarily believe the length of the process has a lot to do with the quality, I certainly believe the amount of effort and energy and work you as trustees put into it absolutely affects the outcome. So what I've provided for you here is a sample, and it is a sample and a sample only. If you elect to hire a search firm and you do hire a firm, they will have some advice and counsel on this. There are some things I've embedded in here which I think are best practices, and I will encourage you to undertake those, but you may elect to do all of this or a significantly different approach. But this is an approach that is often used and I think is very effective. So if you look at this, this suggests I believe your president has announced her intention to begin her new post on the 1st of August. So I don't know when her last day here will be, but at some point you will need to identify an interim because it's going to take probably a minimum of 6 and probably up to a year. And that assumes, by the way, that you're successful the first time around. It's not uncommon, I hate to tell you this, but to have to repeat this process if you're unsuccessful in a search. It's less often the case with a superintendent president or a district chancellor that searches failed than it is with a college president in a multi-college district, but there are failed searches at every level. And California, if you look at the history of the state, especially in recent years, you will see a number of failed searches, and that's just part of the process. So this timeline suggests that you would probably begin your work in August of 23 by announcing the vacancy and a search for a new CEO. Then in September of that year, you would probably, if you decide to use a search firm, you would put out a request for proposals from search firms. And by the way, I will tell you that there is a real broad difference of quality of search firms. So there are a lot of them out there, and you need to take the selection of the search firm almost as seriously as you do the selection of the superintendent president, because as you've heard earlier this evening in public comments, there are some firms that are going to give you a much more robust set of candidates than some other firms might. And so you're going to want to hear presentations from the firms that want to do this work. You're going to want to put out a very detailed RFP that tells them exactly what it is you want them to do. And by the way, there's a myriad of approaches. Some search firms want to do everything from soup to nuts. They want to write the job description. They want to do all of the advertising. They want to do all of the back office work that takes place. They want to do all of the background checks. They want to organize all the process up to the point where the public forums are held and the board begins their interviews. There are other firms that, at the other end of the spectrum, that would tend to say to you, we think you have a good HR operation. There's no reason that your own HR operation can't do the back office work. And then they really provide support for you as a board and in the process of identifying candidates and ultimately seeking input from the college and the community and facilitating the interview process. So there's a lot of ways you can go about this, and different firms will give you different approaches, and you need to take that process very seriously. Then in October, if you seek out a search firm, you probably will conduct interviews of that firm at that time, and then select a firm, and probably later in that same month, and again, keep in mind all of this timing is pretty general at this point. Once you identify a search firm, they're probably going to give you a calendar, a search calendar, that's going to have literally dates on it for many of the steps along the way. The search firm will begin usually by interviewing you as trustees individually and talking with you collectively as a board. I believe that that search firm should do public forums to find out what the college and the community want in the next president. Now, that's not a step that all search firms will use. A lot of them just tend to use boilerplate job descriptions, or they take the last one that you had and sort of dust it off and update it. I think the community involvement, it's my advice to you that the community involvement should be on the front end as well as once the candidates are identified. Because the more input you get on what the college and the community believe they want in the next president, superintendent, the better able you are to refine your own wishes and needs as a board. So I think a forum, a public forum, and as you see, not only a public forum, but I believe there ought to be small group meetings with the governance leaders in the college to find out what folks want in the next superintendent president. Believe me, the likelihood of you getting a CEO that lasts not the average 4 or 5 years, but lasts 8 or 10 or 12 or longer is much higher if you have a real clear understanding of what you want, so that when you hire somebody, they match up with those wants. It's often the case that boards believe, based on sort of a cursory view, that they want one thing, and they go out and hire that, and then realize that's really not what the college needed. And that tends to lead to brief tenures of CEOs. It's hard on the CEOs, it's hard on the board, and it's especially hard on the college. So your goal should be to try to find somebody that really fits with what the college needs at this point in its evolution. And I can tell you from experience, not only working up and down the state, but research that has been conducted, that long-term relationships between stable boards and stable CEOs lead to very successful colleges over the long haul. Revolving doors on the president, superintendent, and a lot of turnover and upheaval in the board leads to not as successful colleges and districts. So your goal should be to try to make sure you understand exactly what it is you're looking for in a CEO, and that you ultimately end up with that fit. Then, as you can see at the regular meeting, probably in November, you're going to consider the profile that has been developed. And as the policy directed you, you have to approve that job description in a public meeting. Assuming the description is approved, then the position is posted. And to be honest with you, there's a lack of clarity on what the requirement is for Pasadena on the length of posting, but generally speaking, they're posted at a minimum of 45 days and usually a maximum of 60. It is very important that these processes, once they get started, stay on track, and that you hit your deadlines and your dates all along the way. Because if the process gets bogged down for a variety of reasons, and it can, you can lose really good candidates, because often very good candidates are sought out by multiple colleges and districts at the same time. So once you set this calendar in motion, you want to do everything you can to stay at it with it. Then again, in November, you would begin to consider the membership of that screening committee, and again, the policy suggests that many of those are recommended to you by the various organizations that they are representing. So you will ultimately need to approve the total committee, and as you saw, it includes 27 individuals. Then in January, the committee begins their work. At this point, they're probably going to get together and do a workshop with the search firm to begin talking about the process and getting a real clear understanding of how that works and what their role is. And then probably somewhere in late January, the end of that 60-day posting at midnight that day, the position closes. Now, there are a variety of ways to advertise a job so that you can advertise it as until filled, with the initial application deadline being at that 45 or 60-day terminus, but people could still apply after that time. I tend to recommend that because I think that occasionally people come into the process late, and if the pool is anemic, and unfortunately a lot of pools are these days, it's nice not to have to start the process all over again. If you advertise it as until filled, you can extend it without having to start over again and go through the whole process. But again, that's something your search firm is going to counsel you on, and you'll ultimately have to decide. Then immediately after that position closes, either the firm, or I prefer human resources, begins to review those applicants to make sure their applications are complete and that they meet the minimum qualifications for the post. And at that first meeting, they provide, at that next meeting, they provide the committee with the folks who are qualified for the position according to the job description that you developed. And then the screening committee meets formally, probably in late January, to begin developing their interview questions and their format of their process. And then in February, they meet to determine who of the folks that are qualified for the job they wish to interview. And that can be anywhere from 5 or 6 or 7 people. Some committees like to interview 12 or more. So it really depends on the committee, and that's why you appoint them, because you want them to conduct this process and give you advice and counsel. And then there usually is a day-long committee to conduct those candidate interviews and ultimately to narrow that group down. Now, the last part of this is an extremely important part, and if the consulting firm is doing as they should, if you hire one, they should make it really clear early in the process exactly what the dates for these things are going to be, so that you can clear your calendar and there's no confusion over what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. Because, as I said, especially when you get to this point and you've announced or you have been forwarded the candidates, now is when other searches are going on and you have a high likelihood of losing somebody if you fall behind. So you really need to stay on track at this point in the process. Now, this approach, one I really believe you should subscribe to, involves not one but 2 series of board interviews. The first one is to conduct interviews with the folks the committee has forwarded to you, and at that point to develop a set of finalists, probably 2 or 3. Sometimes more than that. If the board has a really robust pool, you may end up with more finalists. Then you hold another set of public forums. You probably want to have at least a couple of those, because you want to make sure that class conflicts and other things don't keep people from being able to attend. So I recommend that you have one during the day so that folks on the campus who can come, and then one in the evening so that community members or other folks on the campus who didn't get to come during the day can come to those forums. And then I believe at that point you conduct another full set of interviews with those finalists. Now, a lot of boards will only do one set of interviews, and then they'll do the forums, they'll take the input, and then they will meet and decide who they want to select. I just believe it's in your best interest to conduct not one interview before the forums, but then after the forums, and you get all the feedback from all those various groups and individuals that are going to see these candidates, then conduct another set of interviews. Now you're really well informed about these finalists, and you can be very probing with your questions and make certain that the fit that you really need, you're going to get. And then at that point, in closed session, you have the conversation about what you want to do. By the way, if you want to do site visits, again, you have me here for advice and counsel. I don't tend to like site visits. I think they tend to be very hard on the final candidates. If you want to do a site visit on the candidate that you select, I think that's probably okay. But it's really hard to have a team come into a college and take a look at a candidate, and then the candidate not to get that job. Then they sort of have to go home to their after that everybody thinks their woman or man didn't win. So I recommend you not do site visits. You ought to be able to get all you need from very robust reference checking. And I argue that not only I always try to involve not only the consulting firm in the initial background reference checks, but I often ask the academic senate president or a member of the board to do some reference checks as well. It's amazing what you can find out colleague to colleague about candidates. And again, the better informed you are, the more likely you are to get a good fit of candidate and needs for the college. And then finally, you would, in a public meeting, appoint that individual, and the new superintendent president would probably come on board sometime between May and July. Now, do you have any questions about this process before I move to the next? Yes.
So how much of this would be conducted virtually versus in person?
Well, that's up to you. I don't like virtual interviews. We had to go through it during COVID. I actually worked on a search that required that. I just don't think...
They would come on campus, just not be given a campus tour? The thing you didn't like?
Oh, I'm talking about site visits. That's when you go to the candidate's campus and you talk to all of her or his colleagues.
I see.
And when I say it's hard on the candidates, it's hard because if they don't get picked, they have to go back to where they were, and everybody knows they were looking for another job. They didn't get it. It's bad enough when they're known to be finalists, and they will be. That's public information.
Okay.
No, I'm not talking about. They would come to this campus. Yes.
So then, for candidates from wherever, they would need to fly in and be put up in a hotel and.
Yep. You may have, and I don't know, you may have some policies on reimbursement of candidates, finalists for jobs. I don't know what those are. But candidly, this is a fabulous institution. You're going to have people that really want to be the superintendent president. And if they're in California, it should be no difficulty for them to get here. And if they're in Atlanta and they want this job, they'll come to California. They need to. Nobody wants to take a job like this without having met all of you face to face and the leadership of the college. And you don't want to pick somebody that you've only seen on television. I feel sorry for the boards that had to do that. A few of them did. Okay, if you'll turn your attention to the other document I gave you, I won't go through this one in great detail because it is almost identical to the one you just saw, except that it is more, it's a tighter timeline. It suggests that once you know when the last day for your current superintendent president is, you would go right to work, probably in July, around the early part of July, to do the same things, and you would... this thing would be a little bit more compressed. Now, it's very, very important that the part of this process where you decide what you want in the next president superintendent and the part of it where you're doing the forums and ultimately making the selection take place during the appropriate part of the academic calendar. So that's not something you can do over the Christmas holidays or over the summer. And candidly, you need to look at that academic calendar, and I'm going to make this up, but if classes start on August 14th, then you don't want to have public forums the third week in August or the fourth week in August because people are getting back in the swing of the college. The best months to do that kind of work are September, October, and early November, and in the spring, the best times to do this kind of public work are from early February to around the end of April. So you want to be very sensitive to the academic calendar when you ultimately develop the search calendar. Now, you can still do a shorter process, a faster process, It's just that you need to pay attention to the academic calendar so that you ensure that the people who want to have input have an opportunity to have that input. So when you look at this one with the green highlight, it is a quicker process. Any questions on that one at all?
Bryce,
Yes.
my only question for this one is, I mean, first of all, thank you for walking us through all of this. It's very helpful as a sample guideline here. One is a process that takes approximately, roughly, just under a year, and one is a process that takes just over half a year. In your experience in guiding search processes and seeing search processes clearly, is there a substantial difference in the outcomes when there's a shorter timeline versus a longer timeline during the search process?
No, not that I can tell. The difference is this process is very dynamic, and it tends to take over a lot of the attention of an institution. When you're going through this detailed a process to select a new leader, then there's tons of involvement that's required, and there's lots of rumor and innuendo and gossip that go with these processes. And that's why it's so important to establish a calendar and stick with it, because there will be times when these processes you will think this thing's spiraling out of control. And so if you have a good firm that's helping you, and if you as a board are dedicated to staying the course and following your own calendar, then I have not seen a great deal of difference. Mainly, colleges are driven to one extreme or the other based on when the announcement takes place and what the academic calendar looks like. So if somebody announces their departure, I'm going to make this up, but on the 1st of March, then it makes it a lot easier to get a process done to have somebody in place on January the 1st. If they announce on October 15th, it makes it easier to do a process that has them reporting on or around July the 1st. But honestly, for a superintendent president or a chancellor, it's my experience, especially with your reputation, that the timing is not going to be critical in terms of who applies for the job. Faculty positions, it's harder to hire them when you announce them in January than it is because they're young. They tend to be younger families or younger individuals who are more dictated by the academic calendar. CEOs tend to be older people, and they don't tend to be as impacted by the academic calendar. Now, those are generalizations, of course, but it's been my experience that the length of this process does not correlate with the quality of the outcome, unless you try to cram it in 2 months, and you can't do that.
Thank you.
Okay, my final comments on this process are that you study this and look at it, and then make a decision fairly soon if you want to employ a consulting firm, and then really do hone in on what it is you want in that firm and make sure you get a good firm. And then hold their feet to the fire once they develop that calendar to stay on course, and dedicate yourselves to the hard work that's necessary to do this process. It is very labor intensive, it's very stressful, and yet it can result in an absolute fabulous relationship between the college, the superintendent president, and the board. Okay, now I'd ask you to take a look at the administrative regulation that I gave you, and we'll turn our attention to the appointment of an interim. You really don't, other than the one line that's in the policy on hiring the president superintendent that suggests that you can hire an interim. You really don't have any guidance in policy or regulation. However, there is an administrative regulation on the hiring of interim administrators that I think gives you some direction. So if you look at the last page of this, page 3, there are only 2 bullets there, two numbered items. And the first one says, and again, this does not apply to the superintendent president. This applies to the president putting somebody in an interim administrative post. But I think the advice is pretty good. When a vacancy or necessary requires it, the superintendent president will conduct appropriate consultation within the college and then recommend to the board the appointment of a position without a search for up to 6 months. And then the item 2 tells you that you can take that to a year or to 18 months. It's less important than item 1. The point I'm making is I think the first few words of that, where it says, will conduct appropriate consultation, is very important to you. So as you prepare to ultimately consider an interim, you need to, I would encourage you, even though you're not required, but I would encourage you to consult with leadership of the college in doing that. So what you've asked me to do is to help you identify potential candidates for the interim. And so I will do that. It is my thinking from a timing point of view that you probably want to have this interim identified on or around the 1st of July, which would mean I would need to get you some people to talk with late in June. There's also the possibility that even after you identify somebody, that individual may not be able to report right away. And so it's not inconceivable that you may have to appoint an acting president if your current president decides to leave in mid-June or early July and you don't have the interim locked up yet. You may even have to put an acting president in the role for a period of weeks until you name the interim. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you, and I've already taken some notes based on the public meeting the last time and tonight's public meeting on the comments from constituent groups on what they'd like to see in an interim. But I would be very interested to hear from you as the board what you're looking for in an interim. Now let me, and this is a gross oversimplification, but let me suggest to you that interims can go on a spectrum from very laissez-faire sort of maintainers or maintenance leaders only. They just are keeping the ship afloat, to the other end of the spectrum where they really do keep right on moving as a president. They're setting goals. They're doing programming. They're acting as if they were the regular president. So you see interims along that spectrum. I'd be interested in what you see and in the attributes you would like to see in your interim. And I'm going to take notes.
I think I have real guidance to give at this moment, but one thing I would say is we're presumably looking at a significant amount of time. I mean, it could take as long as a year, I understand. So it seems to me that it's that one requirement is that the interim be acting as a regular superintendent president during that time, rather than being a caretaker or laissez-faire. I would lean toward being more active in that's the first thought that comes to mind.
John, Trustee
The
Martin.
first thought that comes to my mind is in order to answer the second question, you have to somewhat have an idea on the first question. The first question was your time. You gave us 2 different time parameters. So if you're talking about a 6-month time parameter and 2 or 3 of those months are summer and you're trying to get things buttoned up in a relatively short amount of time, then that would lean me more towards somebody to keep the ship afloat. If you're talking about a longer process with less summer months, when things kind of, in summer just kind of die down a little, then I think on the continuum that you mentioned, there would be, and I view it as a continuum. I don't think they have to be absolutes.
No.
I think, a longer interim implies that you do need to pick up some key priorities and keep some things moving. Maybe the higher key priorities or higher key time-sensitive areas. We have a newly, we have a new bond campaign that has been successful, and things need to keep moving. So if we're looking at a longer period, there might be some items where you need that kind of a little more interactive guidance to make sure they stay moving. If you have a shorter search and it's going across summer, there's no use, trying to change the direction of the aircraft carrier just so that you can change it back. That we're talking very conceptual here, and in some ways these are very detailed up conversations you need to have. They're not really concept down, but you asked me a conceptual question, so I'm going to give you a conceptual answer. So I think, in short, there are these 2 items that you discussed. The length of the search and some of the things that we're looking for need to go a little bit of hand in hand. I have a question for you, if I may. It's not on this topic, but it's on this greater topic. So I'm not referring to acting superintendents, but interim superintendents. So what are some of the ramifications or perceived ramifications from having an interim superintendent who may potentially be a candidate for the final position?
As far as I can tell, you don't have any policy prohibition of that. There are a number of districts in the state where you cannot serve as an interim if you intend to apply for the job. I couldn't find anything in your policies that suggests that to be the case. So, you can certainly...
I was worried about a policy as much as I was worried about, for example, I've heard in past searches, and maybe you have a very good perspective, you can add credence to this statement, that sometimes it's perceived that when a board selects an inside interim who's also a candidate for the finalist, there's a perception that it might be a shoo-in. I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying that there's that perception. And I don't know, just because I've heard that in previous searches, is that you've been out and about the state, and maybe that's not a correct perception. Something like that is what I'm kind of referencing. And what are the other things I may not be thinking about where when you select an interim who might be a candidate for the final position impacts the final position?
Yeah, I'll give you my admittedly highly biased opinion, and that is that anytime you have a search, there are always candidates who are going to try to find out if there's a favorite internal candidate. And I always sort of laugh at that. This is a great college, and if somebody's not going to apply because they think there's somebody internally who's a strong candidate, they're not a candidate you want in the pool anyway. I mean, you want strong candidates. You want people who are going to say, well, yeah, I know there might be an internal candidate, but I'm really good, and I'm going to apply because I think I am good. So I tend not to worry too much about that. You're right. There are going to be a lot of rumor and innuendo whether you pick an internal or whether you pick an external. That just goes with the process. But I would not, in terms of picking an interim, I would not be swayed one way or the other for fear that it will have anything to do with the candidate pool. Because if the candidates who are going to be shied away because of something like that, you don't need them in the pool anyway. Does that make sense? Am I making sense to you? It doesn't make sense. Okay.
I have a question
Yes.
on the pool of candidates. You mentioned a couple times in your presentation tonight that PCC is a good college with a good foundation, and that there will be candidates who will apply. And so my question is, at what point between 6 months and 12 months, when we have the pool, do we start thinking, okay, this could be longer than 6 months or longer than a year?
Well, you won't really know that until after the position closes. So once you advertise the post, the day after it closes, and somebody, either the firm or HR, begins to go through those, you'll get a real quick feel. Now, if you hire a search firm, they're going to be recruiting candidates, so they're going to have a feel as well. Now, I don't want to kid you. The pools for superintendent presidents and district chancellors and even multi-college district college presidents have been very, very anemic in the last year or two. The jobs are getting harder. They're getting more stressful, and a lot of faculty that used to aspire to the presidency are no longer doing so. And so it's getting harder and harder to get good candidates. What I referenced a couple times earlier this evening, and I would underscore now, is that you have a bit of a leg up because you have a college with a really good reputation, and have had a good reputation at this college for a long time. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to see the potential of being the superintendent president of this college as a really wonderful career opportunity. And that doesn't even count the wonderful community that you live in, and and the fact that there are still a lot of people who were like I was earlier in my career, who want to come to California, where most of the exciting stuff going on in community colleges is going on right here. So you may not get as many applicants as you'd like, but I think of the people that are out there looking for jobs, you're likely to get a good group of them applying.
Any other questions?
Any more feedback for me in terms of, yes?
Just some more feedback. I think for us, with what we have on our plate, even if we elect to go the shortened time frame, I think we still would want a more active, hands-on interim versus a laissez-faire. And I'm referring specifically to we've got bond issuances coming up and so forth. So I would be inclined to look for a more active, hands-on versus a laissez-faire interim.
My preference is to find an interim that is going to serve as an acting president and not as a maintainer, and also a president that is, because we have bond measures, we have issues dealing with facilities, we have issues dealing with construction, And of course, we always have budget issues, but to also have a president that is knowledgeable on those issues and that is willing to take an active role in understanding and making an effort to be a subject matter expert to the extent possible in consultation with outside consultants and legal counsel, of course, to help guide us, but to take a concerted effort in being active in providing guidance and to have that type of experience and to have an interim that preferably to have experience at a either community college or K through 12 with bond measures and knowing how to work with outside community groups and having a swath of experience in working with different stakeholder groups of various interests and learning how to reconcile those interests in moving forward. That always keeps in mind the mission of the college and that students come first.
I appreciate all of my colleagues' comments so far. My brain, when you asked us this question, kind of went more to the personality and the approach that this interim person would bring into the role. And so, in terms of, I'm not really disagreeing with any of the comments that have been said so far. Nothing about that. But I'm thinking about, someone who has had experience, jumping in and working with a diverse set of stakeholders, but, particularly looking at our shared governance and our various campus constituencies and, being having that experience to be able to jump in and from, I'm going to say it as if like day one, but, jump in and on day one be able to understand how to at least begin to engage and bring people to the table and make folks feel still committed to this ongoing process that we have, and then to make sure that we are able to focus on this, as you have outlined for us, intensive search process. I think having an interim that will allow us to really focus not on what necessarily the interim has to. Well, saying this way makes no sense in my brain now, but focus more, allowing us to be more focused on the search process. Thank you.
Trustee Silver?
I think this college could use somebody that is a really good communicator and listener and has the skill of a diplomat and in speaking with all the different stakeholders, communities, and sense of humor is a plus.
I have a question, Bryce. When you work with colleges that are looking at interims, do the minimum qualifications for president apply to minimum qualifications for interims?
That's really up to you as a board. When you're seeking an interim, and you've mentioned some things that would suggest you certainly want to make sure you get someone who has an understanding of finance and budgets and facilities and, of course, students. But there's not a requirement that frankly, you haven't decided what the requirements for the next president are going to be yet. So the only thing you could do is default on the last ones. But I've not seen boards, pardon me, go to that extent in seeking an interim of, laying down the requirements for the job.
Trustee Gibson?
Yeah, I think I'm leaning in this. I'm plowing the same field. It feels to me like we have a particular set of circumstances here, and it is the college does have such a great reputation, and there are some serious issues. Many people have mentioned the bond. There are negotiations around labor settlements. There is the search to take care of. It seems like this is a very demanding job. So I would actually feel like we need very high standard up toward the level of what our search for a full-time person would be. The interim needs to be able to deal with these important issues we're dealing with that are complex. We have a lot of legal issues that have come up and that we've been had to work with attorneys on. We've had we want to start rolling the bond out very soon, and we want to be doing the search. That's something that will need the cooperation of the interim president, as well as Alton mentioned, they're freeing us to do some things. So I think it's a very demanding position. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's where I'm leaning.
I do want to add that it would be great to have an interim who has experience with student success outcomes. Given that this may be 6 months or a year, we can't lose sight of that we're still looking at student success and have the experience working with student services, even, of course, working with faculty, on shared governance issues to ensure that the college is still moving forward on student success outcomes.
I think one last thing we forgot is also somebody that has a proven track record of knowing how to work with the Board of Trustees, where there's a diversity of opinions, thoughts, approaches, that knows how to manage all of those diversity of thoughts that can bring consensus, that can help facilitate in bringing a consensus, to engage in good problem solving and to focus on problem solving and to put together a pathway given all the different opinions that boards have.
This has been really helpful. I appreciate your input, your feedback. And with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any other questions that you have.
Was any other comments? Well, thank you so much for being here on a Memorial Day weekend, Friday afternoon and early evening. With this, I believe that we have guidance as to what we need to do and how we're going to conduct ourselves as a board moving forward, both with the permanent search and the interim search.
Oh, before we adjourn, I have something I want to say. Okay. And this is because I asked at our board meeting in April and in May to have this topic put on the agenda, and I don't control what's on the agenda, and so my concerns have not appeared yet on a meeting, this one or the one coming. So I feel I need to speak now, and my concern is about the time and money the board law firm has been billing, looking for invoices to give to me, a board member. And I find that curious. When Trustee Gibson asked for invoices, or an invoice, he was ultimately given it. And it's very similar. And, sorry, I'm nervous. I don't understand why the obfuscation. I don't understand what's being hidden from the board. I don't understand when I asked for invoices why the response wasn't, oh, our client wants to see the bills. Sure, here they are. It just now I'm riled up. Now I'm so curious. Instead of just being a transparent, here you go, here's what you need, since as trustees we have fiduciary responsibility for the college, it's a very natural question. And at one point, so there are so many things now that we see on the bill, it's as if we, who are not engaged directly with the trustees, are sitting in the proverbial cave seeing shadows. So we're trying to guess, based on cryptic lines, of what some members of the board and our hired law firm are doing for us. Because I don't know. I don't feel there's been transparency. And the most alarming issue to me concerns, I'll just start, on invoice 675963 of February 28th, 2023. On February 23rd, there was a line item
Tammy,
states multiple.
excuse me.
I am going to keep speaking because I feel I have been shut down.
We have our board counsel here
I
who is
know.
going to advise.
Yes.
This,
So when I
please.
finish, she can address this. She says the firm wrote multiple correspondence,
The concern, pardon me, Trustee
client
Silver, is
Ray
that the
issue with
substance
foundation
Is that
member.
the substance of the entries
Okay,
are to
I
the
have been
client
told,
and
I
work
have been
product.
put off. I am not going to be put off
I
any
understand.
longer.
I'm just telling you
On
that by
February
revealing the
28th,
substance, it is a violation of the
2023.
privilege. That's all I'm going to advise you. You obviously are free to do as an individual what you are
I
going to do.
feel our fiduciary, I am so worried about our college, I believe it supersedes. Conference, office, and correspondent client, Ray
And the
PCC
other thing I'll note is this may
Foundation
be out of
matter.
order under the Brown Act. That's all
Invoice
I'll also comment.
678245. The
Trustee
survival
Silver, I don't-
of this college is so important to me. I'm willing to take that risk. March 2nd, 2023, line item, telephone K. Kwong, Ray Pasadena City College, foundation issue. March 9th, 2023, line item, telephone and correspondence potential investigator, Ray PCC foundation issue. March 10th, 2023, line item, conference office Ray investigation into PCC foundation matter. March 14th, 2023, line item, correspondence potential investigator, Ray PCC foundation issue. Invoice 681934.
Trustee Silver, I'm going to need to stop you because this is.
I will not be stopped. April 13th,
I don't know
2023,
that there's
line
a way
item,
to- excuse me.
telephone
This is out
third-party
of order under the
investigator,
Brown Act, but
Ray
it's-
foundation issue. April 21st, 2023, line item.
I'm gonna need to adjourn the
correspondence
meeting.
potential
there-
investigator, Ray engagement.
I'm going to second
If there
that.
is a trustee
There-
that has an
there's-
issue,
is
it
there
is
a vote
not the
to-
college's duty to provide legal representation for an individual. This law firm is to represent the board as a whole. If there is somebody that has an issue, there is an HR department. That is the proper avenue to pursue personnel issues.
Trustee Silver, you've been advised multiple times that you can directly contact the board counsel.
And
to
I
speak-
have
excuse me, let me-
contacted the board counsel. I have received silence. I have
Our
had
board
to,
counsel is
I
right
have
here.
had to, she is here now. I have had to email multiple times to get a response.
Did
doesn't-
you raise your issues with the board counsel directly? Did you raise those issues that you read out loud
I have
directly
had
with
not
the?
great success in merely asking for invoices, which should have been an easy and simple.
But this is not a question about the invoices. You listed multiple items on that list that is attorney privileged, and we have asked you
Not
multiple.
everything discussed between a client and an attorney is privileged. only regarding
But what I'm asking you,
pending
Trustee
litigation.
Silver,
So since we don't know if this is pending litigation, it does not appear to be privileged.
Trustee Silver, I'm asking you again, did you contact board counsel directly to speak to the items that you shoot?
When we hired this law firm, we were specifically instructed not to personally contact the law firm.
We gave you permission to do that, and it was the emails from the board counsel that invited you to please call her and email her with any questions on any of the items that were listed on the invoices. Did you do that?
I did not.
Thank you.
There was a second on the motion.
There's a second on the motion. All those in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye.